Nikki Orette. I'm a trustee of the Friends of CB UK. You're all very, very welcome this evening. We're delighted to host this hybrid event. We have a live panel here, live panel conversation here in London. We have online participants from across the UK, SA at least, down in Cape Town, and I suspect other parts of the country there too. The event will be recorded for a purpose-lived live podcast series that Jer usually hosts and that she's actually now going to be a part of, which is wonderful. And we will have a Q&A at the end of the session for those in the room. So we'll run the session. There'll be a short video, and then we'll actually we'll end the YouTube stream, and we'll have a bit of conversation in the room. So for those online, you're very welcome. You can hear me. If you don't get the opportunity to ask any questions, which you won't, unfortunately, it's not that connected, we will find ways to connect after this event. So without any further from me, I just will hand you over to Amanda Blair. Thank you so much for agreeing to facilitate this conversation for us and to tee us up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nikki and Team Nikki. So from my side, welcome to our online audience and to the people here in London. It's a pleasure to be hosting this conversation today. We're going to be talking about learning and leading with purpose. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our three panelists. We have Sharon in the middle, Sharon Sands. She's a partner of Heidrick & Struggles London office, where she heads leadership development, leadership assessment, and executive coaching. Sticking with the ladies, we have Gia Whitehead, who's the chairperson and also a co-founder of the Tsiba Business School in Cape Town, which has been offering fully funded tertiary business education to young people in Cape Town since 2005. So already some years. Then we have Jonathan Lowe. He is a principal lecturer at Oxford Brookes Business School, and also the school lead in relation to the United Nations Principle for Responsible Management Education Initiative. So welcome and thank you to our panelists and all our guests. What I'd like to do to start the conversation, we talk about being purpose-led, we talk about living purpose in many contexts, in business, in communities, in society. I'd like to get some clarification on what purpose means from your perspectives. So can I maybe start with Sharon? What is purpose to you in the area that you're working in?
Thank you, Amanda, and lovely to be with everybody. My personal purpose and the purpose that we have with the organisation that I work for in consulting is to enable a world better led. And what's long driven me is getting up in the morning and just helping every single leader that we come into contact with to just be better tomorrow than they are today. And if you can imagine everybody being able to work for someone where they can say, I'm empowered to do my best work, to live my best life, to show up every day and do the best that I can, then what a wonderful world that would be. So what purpose really means for me is something that really drives you, something that means you get up in the morning and do the things that you want to do, something that connects you with communities, with society, with the organisation that you're working for, and is a drive factor, something that you're always moving towards, and something that is enabling you to be able to, have purpose in the work that you do, just engage you and be very, very fulfilled in the work that you do and that you do with others, and being able to see that, bring that to life in the work that you do with your own teams and people to be able to do the work that they love and the work that is meaningful to them. I think that's what purpose definitely means to me. So,
thank you, Sharon. That's got us off to a great start with a lot of food for thought. Jonathan, can I turn to you and ask for your insights on purpose?
I'm possibly going to look at purpose from the point of view of an educational institution, which is, of course, my personal purpose and personal identity are also part of that. But my university, which is Oxford Brookes University here in the UK, has long used a phrase when we talk about our education, that we're trying to educate graduates who will be able to lead lives of consequence. And for me, that word consequence is redolent of all of the issues to do with purpose, because consequence not only for themselves personally, but also socially, increasingly for the planet as well. I'm sure we're going to talk about these things a little later on as well. So my purpose in education and my business school, my organization's purpose in education and purpose in life is to enable those lives of consequence, however defined. That's a broad definition. It needs to be because of the diversity of our students. But it's clearly purpose in the sense of objective-led as well. And let's talk a little bit more perhaps later on about what those objectives might be.
Thank you, Jonathan. Great. Life of consequence. I love that. So, Gia, from your CEBA and personal perspective, what does purpose mean for you?
Thanks, Amanda. Yeah, I think it was well articulated by the other two panelists. For CEBA, it's similar, and yet we're trying to teach and help beautiful young people find their purpose. And we speak about and we use the term purpose lived. So it's not just leading a life, but we're living it. And that's really important to us. And so we have young people who join our organization and come into study at CEBA who may have this huge potential but may not know it yet. And it's about igniting that purpose and that opportunity within them. And so we're really, whilst we're teaching about business and entrepreneurship and leadership, it's really going to the heart of who am I? And helping provide the tools in order to help students to really understand that. And it's a journey that we work with them, and they, at the end, really find themselves. And when they graduate from CEBA, the students leave with a purpose statement around what their intention is as they leave and graduate and go into the real world. And purpose for me is really in the way that we engage with all our stakeholders, working with people who have a passion. And as you say, it's not work. It's something that you spend your life searching for, or maybe you find it early on, whether it's, around doing something beautiful to help kindness in the world, or whether it's just finding work that is great and doing great things that end up being meaningful and in alignment with your values and ethics. And so, purpose is a big word, and we'll unpack.
Thank you very much. So you touched on the students that you're working with there, Gia. Can I just ask, how can we teach purpose? Let's come back to you, Jonathan, on that. How do we ensure that the students, the young people going through the education system, develop their sense of purpose?
It is a matter of teaching, I think, but I think it's also a matter of not assuming that it isn't there in the first place. And I think it quite powerfully demonstrates that it is there in the first place. And here in the UK, you may have heard of the National Union of Students, and they have a sustainability wing called SOS UK. And every year they survey some 7,000 or 8,000 students around the UK to gauge their interest in broad issues of ethics and sustainability, but also the extent to which they feel that their institutions, their universities as a whole, not just business schools, are actually addressing those issues. And it's interesting, for the last 3, 4, 5 years, 80 to 85% of all students being surveyed, 8,000 is a reasonable sample, are saying, yes, these things are important to us. We expect to see them in the curriculum. But around 50% saying, well, they're actually there at the moment. So there is a gap, an interesting gap. And CEBA will be one institution which is trying to address that gap. Certainly, I would hope there wouldn't be in the case of our students that degree of gap. And the organization that I'm also part of, this United Nations Principles for Responsible Management Education, which is great to see that CEBA is also a member of these days, is very much focused on ensuring that that gap that I was referring to diminishes over time. Perhaps more on that later.
Keep your microphone, Jonathan, because you said something very interesting there about not assuming that purpose isn't there in the first place. Could you tell us a bit more what you mean by that?
Well, our students don't come to us entirely unformed, do they? Our students come to us with histories, and those histories will be family histories, they'll be community histories, they'll be coming from a wide variety of places, backgrounds, and they will live in either kind of imbibed or developed or learnt a sense of purpose from others, but also increasingly over time as teenagers, themselves. And so I think everybody on this panel would probably not adopt the view of education as being a kind of empty vessel approach. These students arrive knowing nothing and we pull these things in and then students leave with an education. They arrive with life skills. They arrive with competencies. They arrive with knowing a lot. And increasingly, and it's very interesting when we go, for example, to our open days, and it's the pattern in the UK anyway, to have open days for potential students. 4 or 5 years ago, parents and students were never coming up to me and saying, what are you teaching in relation to ethics and sustainability and responsibility? And now every second parent and every second student is wanting to know that in advance of making their choice about where they go. So that's, I think, a demonstration of the fact that those interests, that sense of purpose, that sense of wanting to be able to contribute to something bigger, collective, whether it's people or planet, is increasingly there. It's our job to work with that, I would say, as an educational institution, to harness that, to deepen that.
Thank you.
Can I hand this on now?
You're allowed to hand that on. Gia, could I ask for your reflections on what we've just heard from Jonathan?
Yeah, so as I was saying earlier, I think it is about igniting. We come from a very different context where our students may not have had the support structures or the family backgrounds where purpose was as clearly defined. And so we asked the question on our podcast around, when you come from poverty and all the other struggles, is purpose something you even think about? But actually our students are the most inquisitive, and I think it doesn't even matter, what that basis is. Everyone finds their purpose and is something that they want to give and they strive for. And actually our students are the ones who are the most perseverant and the most resilient. And often I find purpose is found through people who have been through the most adversity or the most vulnerable. Because when you're really sometimes at your lowest, that's when you're able to really understand who you are. And so in a context, and particularly in South Africa, where we have an over 60% unemployment rate and many other things, we're looking for more innovative solutions for ourselves, for our families, for our communities. And so it does take us to a different level of thinking. And our students are asking those questions and engaging at a very different level and teaching us too.
Thank you, Gia. Can I just stay with you for a moment? The curriculum at CEBA, how does purpose flow into that? Could you give us a little bit more detail about what you do that's potentially different?
Thank you. Yeah, so whilst we do work on the knowledge component and making sure that the right skills and competencies are built in, as well as building in experiential learning and real skills where students are actually working and engaging in companies and networking, at the heart of our model, and we speak about something called a profile of graduateness, is attitude. And we build in values in every area of our curriculum. And so we believe that, the knowledge is one thing, but these days you can find it anywhere. What we're really teaching is around the person and understanding who you are, where I come from, my world, and how each of the different disciplines really fit together and be system savvy and integrated. And so attitude and heart, and we speak about head, heart, and hands is something that is core. And these areas like emotional intelligence, leadership, entrepreneurial thinking, and purpose are credit bearing within their curriculum and just as important as doing maths and accounts and anything else. And another big part is around the social responsibility, and students who have that social conscious and having to pay it forward and work in communities and work on the ground and really engage in real practical ways with the realities of where we come from, and also on campus and in other areas. So it's building that, and it is something you can teach and you work towards. And some already have it in them, and some just find their passions through that.
Thank you. Sharon, can I come over to you about the sense of purpose in the workplace? So we've heard a little bit about the educational approach to purpose. What does purpose look like? What kind of behaviors, for example, what kind of factors contribute to a strong sense of purpose in business in the leadership field from your perspective?
It's an interesting question. Thank you. So for us, we're in the business of helping to, at Hydric, for example, identify the people that want to enter into business. We help find those people, develop them, help them thrive in strong cultures, give them a sense of something that they want to belong to. And what's interesting is that the most of those people who want to stay in great organizations or enter into organizations, particularly as they've been through education where purpose is present for them and they have a sense of purpose, they're really discerning. So they may not yet have developed all of the behaviors that you could say around purpose, but what they're looking for is an organization that means what they say around their purpose. So if they can identify and lead with an organization that has meaning around purpose, they're really interested to know, like, do you really mean it? So when we're looking at what are the behaviors that we're looking for from the future of our leaders, it's about, do you act with integrity? Are you authentic? Is what you're saying actually meaningful? And does that show not just in what you're saying and what's on your website, but what you're doing every single day? Is it present in your meetings? Is it present in your strategy? Is it present in the decisions that you're making? So does that come to life? So that's part of the lived piece for purpose. Is where does it show up? And it's not something that's a strap line on a website, because people see through that really, really quickly. And they don't want to necessarily thrive or have long careers in those organizations. So they're really seeking organizations where the leaders of those organizations are living those behaviors. And that shows up every day in how their shadow of their own leadership, comes through in the organization. So what we're supporting organizations with is, how do you find what that looks like in those behaviors and those values, and identify those, sometimes through assessment, sometimes through building awareness and development of those, and actually making sure that that's part of the fabric and the culture of the organization. So it's looking at, what does that mean for that organization, and what does it look like here? And that will be really unique to each of those organizations. So we spend a lot of time at the beginning what does it mean for you here, and what does it look like? And if we asked everybody what their purpose was here, would there be some commonality? Would people be able to see it and feel it and hear it in the language that's being used and the behaviors that people use when they're showing up? Otherwise, it has no meaning for people, and they don't want to stay in those organizations.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Jonathan, can I come back to you about purpose and the way it's evolved? So what changes are taking place in people's perception of purpose in the workplace? What have you observed recently, and what do you see ahead as well, changes in that way?
That's a tricky one. I can't speak on behalf of all workplaces, obviously, but a reflection of, but as a business school, we're engaging with the world of work in all sorts of ways, from in all sectors as well. And incidentally, in passing, it's often a preconception that students coming out of a business school are all going to work in the private sector. But in fact, many end up in the public sector, the critical area of the public sector, and the non-profit sector, the wider non-profit sector as well. So, in terms of how purpose is being experienced, how it's being led, I would say that I'm going to reflect on the kinds of things that our students reflect on and talk about when they come back after a year of placement. Because a lot of our students go and do, in the middle of their degrees, go and do a year of work. They're in, full-time work. They get exhausted because the UK students anyway are used to getting up at 10 o'clock in the morning and not at 8 o'clock in the morning. But they come back and they reflect on the kind of management they've experienced, on the kind of approach that people have taken to managing them as people and their development as people. And overwhelmingly, they have quite good and positive experiences, which I take as and these are coming from local SMEs, small, medium-sized enterprises, from non-profits, from big corporates, from lots of organizations within the square mile where we are today, many different, lots of financial institutions. And they report to me that the kind of experience they are having, the kind of management they are experiencing, is supportive of them individually, is obviously very goal-oriented as well, but recognizes them and their careers and their futures and their aspirations in the way in which they are managed. So for me, and to some extent, I think that links with what you were saying, Sharon, in that these are this issue of purpose, and we see it in lots of companies, for example, who've signed up doing very many different types of corporate reporting. For example, reporting around the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, which is increasing their kind of framework adopted across many sectors. So that when those are lived in organizations in the way that Sharon was describing, and when that's experienced by our placement students, relatively junior members of the organization, as being real in the organization, I take those as quite positive signs.
Thank you, Jonathan. One of the words that came up when I was researching the panelists was employability. Perhaps, Gia, could I come to you? That topic of purpose in the context of employability?
Yeah. So what's, as I mentioned earlier, it's one thing around learning about getting the right skills and being able to hit the ground running in the world of work. But what really helps students to be employed and stay in employment is around that attitude and the way in which they fit and work within an organization and are able to really add value back. And so we see our students and more where corporates are saying, we would like to employ a CEBA graduate because they have that on top of it. And that's really important. And back to your previous question, we're also seeing some students who do go also into internships while they're studying, or go into getting employed in a company when they finish and don't stay. And we'll say, why? They're one or two examples. Why didn't you stay? And they say, because we weren't aligned, because like Sharon was saying, they don't have the same values or ethics, and it's not a company that I want to work for or represent. And so it's really important when they're choosing the companies that they're saying, we feel aligned and we feel a sense of shared purpose, that we're working towards something. And that's really important. And whilst our students are hungry for employment and there's pressure from families for them to be working, they're able to discern and say, actually, no, this doesn't feel right.
Sharon was nodding profusely there. Could I perhaps could I get your take on that from the point of view of leadership? So is that a behavior that would continue if it's not aligned with the purpose, with the values, with the belief? Does that have an impact in the leadership stage of the career?
Yeah. We don't always have to be the same, but if there are some alignments around the things that matter, and you can see that those values are shared, and more importantly, that those values are meant and lived, then the interesting correlation is that people will thrive in those types of organizations. There is a huge correlation between a purpose-lived organization and actually the bottom line. There's a huge study done by Harvard, but also by another business school in the States, Wharton, a couple of years ago. And it's something like over 10% is a not discretionary effort. It actually shows up in the bottom line. So when you've got a purpose-lived organization and people are aligned around that, then actually it really shows up in what they do. Because you imagine coming to an organization where there is alignment, you just want to give that discretionary effort or just be part of and have the energy around what you're doing, and it's important. And it really then does show up in a commercial way if it's a commercial organization, or an objective way if it's a non-profit organization. It has an impact on the societies and the communities and the people that they are serving. So we've got one organization and their purpose is they're a professional services firm, and they've got a fantastic culture and really, really passionate about inclusion. but it extends into communities and societies, etc. And you can see the difference when you walk into that organisation. You can feel it in the reception. You can feel it. People want to be there, and this is really interesting how that shows up in an organisation that is a big global organisation. You wouldn't necessarily expect it to, and it does make a really big difference. But I think it's not enough just to say what the purpose is. It's the alignment is around having clarity. So it's one thing to sort of, cascade it through an organisation, but if it's really clear and it's really linked to my job, your job, and what we do, and we talk about that, that's what makes a difference. And then you can really feel it in an organisation.
Picking up there on your word alignment, can I just continue that train of thought? How is individual purpose and the purpose of the organisation best aligned? What's needed to make that happen?
A conversation, probably. I think it's asking the questions. If you're thinking about joining an organisation or succeeding, other people's roles in an organisation, then it's having the conversation about what does this mean and how does this show up and how important it is. So we're in an interesting situation sometimes, as an example, where we might be sitting with the board of an organisation who might be bringing in a new CEO, for example. Now, everybody knows that they might look at the organisation's purpose and they might have a really good dialogue about that because they've prepared well and it's fine. And what the board will say to us is, yeah, but did they really mean it? When a crisis happens, what will show up? And how do we then make sure that we can really look at that in depth and really probe and have deep conversations with people, find out what those values pieces are, that what really drives them as an individual and how that's aligned. That's when you can see, well, actually when push comes to shove, what will show up then? And will, in whatever their purpose is, will inclusion still be present for them, or will sustainability still be important for them in those moments? And we've all seen the news where that happens and when it doesn't happen, and it's a disaster for organisations. So there are boards asking really discerning questions around, I know what I'm hearing, but what is really under the surface of this individual, and will that show up when we're with investors or we're with clients and we need to do the right thing? And that's the exciting bit about purpose for us.
Thank you very much. You did say the word sustainability in your thoughts there. Can I just perhaps come back to Jonathan? How does purpose sit with sustainability in your view?
Just a reflection on for a moment on what you were saying there, Sharon, a moment ago, that one of the positive signs that I take in relation to alignment between kind of global frameworks like the Sustainable Development Goals and corporate behavior is reflected in the initiative of the United Nations Global Compact. There may be people in the audience here whose companies are members of the Global Compact and the very active UK network of the Compact. And I happen to be on the advisory group for the Global Compact in my prime capacity, and see evidence of the take-up that's going on in terms of their education programs, their learning opportunities, their public webinars. There is an enormous amount of alignment, if you like, between the stated objective of the company and the behavior of individuals within it in terms of their willingness to both participate in that activity, but also then the way in which it is embedded down the line. So, yeah, sorry, that was a roundabout response, but I hope you don't mind that. But in addition to, in relation to sustainability, it happens to be a very significant component, obviously, of the UN Global Compact, so there's a link to that as well. What I come back to always from a sustainability perspective, certainly in educational work, is a very, very useful set of, they're called competencies, but actually they go beyond competencies, the UNESCO sustainability competencies that you may be familiar with, because and they weren't written by UNESCO, but it was their sort of findings from various researchers over time. And there are 8 different competencies which form the absolute bedrock of my teaching in relation to sustainability. And one of them, to pick up on something that Gia was saying a little earlier on, was a systems orientation. understanding the way in which we as human actors are embedded in natural systems, but we're also embedded in social systems, and the interdependence of us and all other species and all of the systems around us. And that's just one of the 8. But if we can take those kind of, well, they are competencies, because the idea of the UNESCO competencies is that graduates leave with them, and those are the competencies that are demonstrated in the workplace beyond. But they're also very influenced by a set of values. So values are aligned to competencies, and I think they form, through that set of competencies, a very powerful combination and framework for working within.
Thank you very much. Gia, there you were nodding and Jonathan was speaking. You something to add?
Yeah, so absolutely. I think people and planet can't be seen separately. So it all needs to work together. So it's understanding how they're interconnected. And in the teaching and learning space, so it's not only, so sustainability is both about green, but it's also around, how do you create livelihoods? And that again goes back to the planet and the people, and understanding how you can really become creators of jobs and in your work, even within your work. And not just seeking for things to just automatically happen. And it's about being an agent of change, and being conscious of both, the planet and the environment, as well as your world of work.
Thank you. You brought us to the bigger picture there. Can I stay with you a moment, Gia? So your students who graduate with their sense of purpose and what they've learned, how does that impact the communities that they grew up in and that they are living in when they're a student?
Yeah, it impacts hugely. And if you think about both the economic gain that it does for the communities versus, the negative impact of students who aren't studying and aren't working, and what it does. And so our students are really the first in their generation to go to university and get a degree, and they're role modeling leadership and role modeling, having that sense of, what's further and something bigger than just finishing school. And that's hugely important. And so our students, when they come to study at SIBA, they have, they feel so proud that it's almost like they're going to a place of work, and they're growing and they're building. And in the early days, so SIBA wasn't that well known, but now that their families and their communities have seen, the results and the positive impact on those people that have now graduated and are now working, there's a huge shift in terms of people and demand wanting to come to SIBA and to study further, because they're seeing ultimately what it can do for their families and their communities. And then on top of that, the strong emphasis on leadership. And our students are required to work on projects in their communities and on campus. And that's having that social conscience and social responsibility. And there's many of our students, or most, don't want to leave their communities and go and work elsewhere. And whilst it's wonderful to go overseas and study in other areas, they want to give back and improve their homes. And so we do see a huge shift there, and it's taking people off the streets and out of poverty in a real, and that's changing, intergenerational cycles for the long term. So that's powerful.
Right, thank you. Sharon, can I come to the back to the workplace from that perspective? How do leaders with a strong sense of purpose ensure that their impact goes beyond their organizations and their communities as well?
Yeah, thankfully, we're seeing that come to life more and more. I think there's some great examples out there where if an organization is really meaningful about the work that they do and the impact it has on communities, and that can go beyond clients and maybe the work that they do anyway as an organization, a health organization who are literally making people better, but also then going into communities and helping educate people around health and some of those sorts of things. I think for the most part, some of the organizations that we have the fortune to work with, when it's working well, they have sort of three bubbles, which might be people, planet, and profit, gears point, but it's also communities and people and clients, and how does that Venn diagram come together, and what do they do in the middle? And that can range from some organizations in the financial sector who actually at a certain point there is an opportunity and an expectation for senior leaders to not just give money to other non-profit organizations, but actually to be involved in it and to contribute and to work in it. And that can be days of service, it can be fundraising for those people, it can be giving time, it can be being active in the communities. So there's all sorts of different ways. But I think there's a real turning point now where we're seeing more and more organizations actually take accountability for that. It's not down to politics and other things and somebody else's problem. Actually, organisations are taking an active interest in what matters in the community. Our own organisation's just done a huge amount with Ukraine, and lots of organisations have done that. But that is what makes people happy within an organisation. They go, we've had an impact somewhere. So when you said about impact, that's the thing that people are really proud of and what they talk about at their conferences and things. And that's a pleasure to see, because that's where people have a sense of pride and the belonging that they have with an organisation that is having an impact on a community. And it all comes together. And that feeds back into the work that they do and the ideas that they have and the innovation that they can bring.
Gia, you're grabbing the microphone.
Yeah, so we as CEBA, we get funded from corporates and foundations and individuals. And the most successful partnerships we have are where the companies are actually involved on the ground, because it's building morale within the organization, and it's a feel good, and they're giving back and doing something that's bigger. And we're also seeing, back to your question around sustainability, how the companies that we have to report back to and the institutions or foundations, they ask the questions around what are you doing around sustainability, and what are you doing around mental health, and what are you doing with the SDGs. And so the level of reporting has really shifted over the last couple of years, because they're wanting to measure your impact in that way. So there's been a definite shift that I'm seeing in all areas.
Jonathan.
I was going to also talk about reporting, because I think reporting, there's a pressure to participate in and be seen to be participating in and reporting under a variety of science-based targets, GRI, SDGs, whatever it might be. So there's a lot of societal pressure to do that from customers, but also from employees as well. But then that reporting, the requirement to report, also drives behavior in all sorts of ways. And increasingly, reporting is getting more sophisticated in what it expects through reporting, not simply demonstrating quantitative data, but actually real impact evaluation. And that's interestingly where a lot of universities are playing an increasing role through their research and their knowledge exchange work with the corporate sector, is looking at how impact can best be evaluated. So I think reporting is a very important driver. Of course, there's all sorts of possibilities for greenwashing through reporting as well. Everybody recognizes that. But the reporting agencies and the systems that are in place make it increasingly, increasingly less likely that greenwashing is going to occur on a significant scale.
Do you see more transparency coming in through that?
I think there's the expectation of transparency. Whether it is transparency in reality, there is always going to be debate about. You think of the financial sector, and think of where we're sitting at the moment in relation to transparency. And the sustainability track record, for example, of some banks is clearly much better than other banks. And there's any number of NGOs and activist groups who will point out all of the failings in relation to all sorts of sectors in terms of transparency. But I still would remain with my the previous statement that I've made, that corporate reporting and, let's say the whole ESG or sustainability reporting, social impact reporting is increasingly sophisticated and demanding, and therefore it is more likely that we're getting a fuller, better picture of corporate performance.
Sharon, do you have anything you could add to enlighten us a little bit about measuring impact in your area?
The people will always behave according to the measure that you give them. So you better think about what the measure is that you're putting in and why, and what what that might mean for the behavior that you're driving. I think we mentioned this earlier. Thinking about what we help with organizations is thinking about the measures that they're putting in. What's the behavior that they want to drive first? And then how do you measure that so that it has a strong impact? Yesterday we did a fantastic had a great day yesterday because we signed with an organization that we've acquired called Business 4.0, and they do strategy specifically around purpose for organizations. And one of the things that when we've learned to love about them over the last getting to know them over the last few months is that they'll say that actually the data is not necessarily the thing that you need to be driving. It's the insights from the data, and we absolutely completely agree with that. We're very aligned because there's no point in collecting the data if you actually haven't got insights from it. So what's this data telling you? Why have you collected it? What are you going to do with it? How are you going to feed that back to the organization? And actually you can rip all of that data up if it isn't going anywhere, it isn't doing anything, or it isn't giving you insights that would change the way that you're working as an organization or change the thing that you're doing for your customers or your communities. So data is just one point that will enable us to see that transparency for sure, but it's the insight that comes from it that really matters.
Thank you, Sharon. Gia, can I just ask you, you talk in the CEBA context about purpose lived as opposed to purpose led. Thinking about impact in that way as well, why?
I think it's a great question to ask you. But so for us, I think led is about something you've done. And it's kind of so, and it's one person that's leading, and also there's an interesting topic around leading, and there's different styles in that as well. It's not always that, I think. And living is really important because you can measure something and it's once and it's in history, but living is something that is continuous and it's growing and it's evolving and it's something that is not constant. It's organic. And I think that's just really important in the way that we live, and will live. And so it's really not putting a concrete step on that. And I think that goes back to the measurement and back to the impact. I think it's really important to measure and to look at impact, but it's also important to not be too rigid in the way in which it's done, because then you're not living. Then you're just doing it for a tick box exercise, and it's not authentic.
Can I just ask you all to get out your crystal balls temporarily and say, where do you see this issue of purpose-led, purpose-lived, having a strong sense of purpose as an organization, where do you see that going in the next few years? Any thoughts on that?
Well, so where do you start with a question like that? I don't think that organizations of any kind are going to be able to avoid questions of purpose, even if they wish to, given the state of the world and given the state of the global crises that we face, and the IPCC report of the other day about, clear turning points being reached at this point in relation to climate. But it's not just climate, it's a series of questions about biodiversity. It's all of the questions about global inequality as well. I don't think that it's going to be possible for any organization to not think about how they are contributing either to the problem or to the solution of the problem over the coming term.
I hope it's not going away anytime soon. So I completely agree. People are discerning and they will make their decisions and they will vote with their feet as to the organisations that they choose to join and choose to stay at or choose to leave. And spoke to many, many people who have got fantastic careers in organisations, but actually if they're not that aligned with the purpose, or it's kind of a tick box exercise, they don't stay. and they want to do something different. And you just look at our younger generation coming into the workplace. The things that they talk about first are not salary. The things that they talk about first are, what's the purpose of this organization? Does that have meaning for me? And do I have a path where I can be developed and be aligned with that? They're the two things that they ask first. So I hope it's not going away anytime soon. I'm talking to our friends at Business 4.0 yesterday with us, and they are thankfully overwhelmed with people talking about purpose for the right reasons. So sometimes, in the times past, it would be, we ought to do something on purpose, so we better bring these people in and we'll talk about it. And now they're going, okay, this matters. Like, we need to reset. What do we do? Help us from a strategy perspective, and then we can help actually develop and bring awareness to other people in the organisation and help with that alignment as well and cascade that through.
Very positive. GM.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think purpose is only just growing, and it's not going away. And we're seeing more and more of the youth are the ones that are driving it and asking those questions. And, in the workplace, you spend most of your life working, and you've got to treat it like a relationship or anything else. And it's got to be something that you love and something that you follow and that you speak about and that you work towards. So it's huge. And I think it's already, I'm seeing it everywhere. So hopefully it continues and grows.
Great. So purpose here to stay. Time is running. But I'd like to put one question to all of the panelists before we close, and that is, if you were advising a young graduate from any business school, anywhere, what they should pack in their virtual rucksack to equip themselves for the future of work. It can be an attitude, an approach, an object, a motto, a value. What would you say that one thing is that's going to be important in the future?
Yeah, so it's really hard to give one thing. So I would say to be open-minded, be willing to be challenged and persevere. And I like the saying that I heard that it says, you don't have to start to be great. So you don't have to be great to start, but you have to start somewhere.
It's a killer question, Amanda. Lots and lots. I probably land on authenticity, because if you can be true to yourself and know what makes your heart sing and you find that, then that's great. But don't compromise, and so be authentic. And I like the openness piece, but be authentic. If people find what they love doing, they will more than likely be successful in any walk of life that they choose to. So it would be authentic to what they love and what they enjoy, and then that creates a much better world.
Thank you. So we have openness, authenticity, and
I'm going to willfully reinterpret the question, willfully, and think about a real rucksack that I want to put on my back. And actually, in that rucksack, I think is a really important but very small item, which is a key and a key ring. And the key, hopefully, is the key to your home that you're leaving as you set off on your journey through life. Because I think it's very important that people know that they can go home, wherever home is, if home is a good place. And listening to so many of the other CEBA podcasts, home has been so important as a place of nurturing and loving. So the key to the home. But on the key ring, there is, on many key rings, you can find a little globe hanging at the bottom of the key ring. That, to me, needs to be there as well, because that reminds us of our common planet, of all the systems issues we've been talking about earlier on, about our dependence on that planet as people. So a key on a key ring with a globe in the rucksack with plenty of place for other things as well.
Wonderful. What better equipment could we have? So before we say goodbye to our online audience, we're going to have a short presentation of film from the school in Cape Town that we've been talking about. But I'd like to say thank you very much to the panelists already. Those of you in the room have opportunity for a Q&A afterwards, and we're curious to know what you ask or to hear your own insights into purpose. but I'd actually like to now invite the film to roll. So thank you.
It was post-apartheid, the dawn of the new democracy, so it was hope for everyone in that time. Growing up in Cape Town, in the township specifically, was not easy at all.
So I am from a relatively small township called Ennerdale in the south of Johannesburg. So it was a bit tough growing up. I knew straight from high school that I wouldn't have an opportunity to go study anywhere.
We are 7 siblings altogether. I went to Pelican Park High. It was a high school in the southern suburbs. It was really underprivileged community. I remember we were all posh to get to our high school.
I am a current SIVA student. I am in my 3rd year of the Business Administration and Entrepreneur Leadership.
We're close to Nyanga, not so far away, which is like the murder capital of South Africa.
One morning I had my final exam and I was writing English. We were required to do a descriptive essay. I was on my way, I commuted to there via bus or taxi. I was on my way to write my exam in my school uniform, and literally on my way I was robbed, I was gun pointed on my way to high school, you know.
In 2017, my friend Seppo passed away in a very tragic death, and that it really got to me. I got to a point where I was feeling lost.
My father, he was an entrepreneur. He had a business and we were doing fairly well. And then during the 2010 recession, so he lost his business.
My friend was coming to drop me off home, and we just parked outside my house. Out of nowhere, 4 guys just come with guns pointed at us while we're sitting in the car. So now every day when I get outside the house, when it's in the evening, I'm imagining someone pulling up with a gun saying, "Yo, give me your phone," you know. And it's something that lives in my mind literally almost every day, and it's a crazy thing.
When I look back and think about SIVA, I really feel like SIVA sort of gave me that great foundation to which I could sort of jump ahead in life.
Going to SIVA meant that I get to change the narrative. I get to go to university, I get to graduate, I become employable, I gain skills, and I'm able to contribute to the betterment of my family, myself, and my community at large.
With my intention statement as well, my intention statement is I will remain open to hope, love, and happiness whilst I steadily build toward a path of meaning and wealth.
I discovered what purpose living is. I actually discovered who I am and what my greater purpose is in life.
I get to touch other people's lives, just as SIVA has touched my life, and I get to bring that hope and those opportunities that I had experienced through SIVA to them. So I think I've inspired quite a lot of people, and they do every now and then reach out to say, how did you get to where you're at? How can I apply at SIVA? How can I also change my life?
I didn't know an institution like SIVA exists that provides one with an opportunity as beautiful as it provided for me, a platform to succeed.
And in order for them to actually get out and, bring back that life, to the community, they need these opportunities to actually study.
The donors aren't just donating towards me, they're donating towards my community. I'm channeling the potential and turning those potentials also into capabilities. And once you're capable, you can act. And if something acts, things change, and that is what we need in our communities when it change.
I wouldn't have received an opportunity, I think, to go study at a great institution like SIVA.
So my life is more purpose-driven now. I have a career now instead of just having a job.
Don't put your wine down.
Firstly, thank you very much. I thought that was insightful. Some of it, a no-brainer, but it's when it's said out loud that it starts to resonate. I've got a question for you, and my question is more around, do you think this is a fair statement? It feels very generational, where the concept of purpose in the workplace in particular, the desire to have that link to sustainability is something that, as you said, Chair, the youth of today are driving the rest of the organizations. And I come from a traditional financial background, which is probably a little bit sort of sometimes stuck in the past. Do you think that's a fair statement to say this is a generational thing, and we will see the increase in the need for purpose as our children all start to go into the workplace?
Like that. Do you need a mic? Do I need a mic? No. Okay. Yes and no. The reason I say yes and no, from my perspective and the people that we talk to, lots and lots of different organisations, yes, it's being driven by a generation that are voting literally with their feet. So I think that will just continue to have a drive. But at the other end of the spectrum, the questions, if you listen to any investor call on an organisation, the questions that those investors are asking on behalf of their customers are a lot to do with purpose and sustainability and, change that matters. So actually, those at the top of the organisation can't get it, even if they wanted to, they've absolutely got to get with the programme. And so therefore, that's created a real shift in this matters for the success of our organisation. And it's not just the right thing to do, it's actually what we want to do. If we're going to attract talent, be a talent magnet at that end, but also be attractive to our clients. And these are the questions that our investors are holding up the mirror to, then I think it's happening at both ends, which thankfully is not just being pushed from the bottom. I loved, your word, you said it's being ignited, and it's got to be ignited at the top and pushed from the people who are coming into the workplace as well.
Could I possibly respond to that?
Yes.
Jonathan Colley from the Purpose Exchange. 5 years ago, we got, I'm sure everybody can hear me.
Okay.
Yeah. We got funding from Innovate UK in order to go in search of the most powerful, motivating force in life that people of all ages have in common, younger and old, from 25 to 80. And we did a 3-month project in Islington, and we discovered to our delight that the answer was economic purpose. So if you can help people align their passions with their ability to earn, that resonates as powerfully with a 25, 45 and 65.
Yeah.
So it is the most powerful thing that binds us intergenerationally.
I heard something lovely in the way it was described, and I think it goes in the beginning of your life, you're learning, then you're earning, and then at the end you're returning and giving back. And I've seen a big shift in the people that are returning, seeing that purpose and wanting to do something differently to how they had done it when they were younger, both in the way that they are with their families and their grandchildren, but also in the way that they're living and wanting to give back. So I think it is a shift. So yes, there's the youth and the driving from that way, but it's almost coming full circle on the other side. And because those questions are being asked, and it's something that is now something people speak about, it's more and more than that the elders are bringing that through.
At the same time, though, I think you have to be very careful about any kind of universal statement. I mean, there are trends, there are generational shifts, there are, discernible changes when I was talking about students today compared to students 5 years or 10 years ago. But at the same time, there's still a substantial number of my students, and I teach a module in environmentally sustainable business when we look at, amongst other things, the impact of the aviation sector on climate emissions. And then you reach the end of the module and you say, well, what are you doing over the holidays? And 80% of them are about to fly somewhere, and aren't giving it a second thought. So I think there's a degree of, realism has to be there in the conversation as well, whilst welcoming, recognizing, and supporting those shifts that are definitely going on.
Yeah. And also the present tense is the present tense. So, we're all living, regardless of our age, we're all living now.
We're living in the here and now.
So we have to deal with what's current as well, regardless of our age.
I think a lot of people, sorry.
Lady in the red jacket.
Oh, I don't think so. I might, unless you think I need to. That I'm curious about, with this kind of growing disconnection and disengagement that we see still in people at work, how purpose is what's the intersection with purpose, and what's the opportunity for purpose to help reverse that trend, which doesn't seem, particularly the shift to hybrid working doesn't seem to be going away. And what I love the positive themes that were explored, but we still have this major issue of how people are feeling. And I think perhaps part of the answer, but I'm just kind of curious what you see in terms of that relationship between engagement or disengagement and disconnection that's still there. And why is purpose not helping?
You might have some in terms of the...
we did a piece of research actually we happened to do it pre-pandemic. It was a happy accident that then we could repeat it post-pandemic, or not that we're post-pandemic, but you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. And purpose was the thing that went up significantly post-pandemic. Every other sort of, what am I looking for to be fulfilled in work pretty much stayed the same, but purpose shifted quite significantly. Team contribution to the team and being part of a team went up a little bit. And so there was a real difference between those that left organizations because they didn't have that belonging, or they didn't feel that they were aligned with their hybrid policies, etc. But there were other people that actually felt that the sense of purpose really increased when they were remote, or when they were going through difficult times in an organization, because of how the organization behaved in times of crisis. So actually, it really cemented a lot of people's connection to organisations and the purpose of why they're there. So there was both. But there's those organisations that handled things like that well. Actually, their purpose rating, engagement went up because people saw humans. They saw what really mattered. They saw how they'd acted and behaved and what they did during the pandemic, perhaps, and also in times of crisis. Even some of the things like, whatever you look at, some of the policies that have been in the States, Black Lives Matter, when they see how their organisation responds to those things and actually they feel they're connected to or not connected to, their purpose goes up. And if they're not there, they go. So hybrid working is probably a different topic, probably, but that's what we saw from the research, at least.
Well, that's a question around how to make this a cohesive global movement when you have the media feeding certain things, and you have social media platforms which increasingly seem to be broken. So how does something like this become bigger, or as big as it needs to get?
Yeah. So I actually have been doing some work with some other organizations, and it's worldwide, that are doing huge work in changing narratives online and in social media, and in a positive way. And they seeing how conversations are organized and changed to influence democracy and many other things, particularly as well as in South Africa. So there's incredible technology these days, and there's a big movement to shift the media and the conversations that are happening in a positive way, and bringing in those purpose, and it's been fascinating. So it's a whole new world, but I've seen it. There's a lot of it happening that you don't even know, where they're bringing in anonymous voices to change that narrative. So whilst there's still a lot of the negative, like what you saw, like even with Russia and the cyber environment, there's other things happening in the world. And one of the first examples was obviously in America with the US elections and how those were informed and changed. But there's a big shift, particularly in the tech space and world, of how to change and influence in a positive behavioral way.
Jonathan, you mentioned the SDGs, and unless you're on the inside, you don't know about the SDGs. It's like, how does it become common knowledge?
Knowledge about the SDGs does vary by country.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, obviously it's an international set of goals, but it's been signed up to by nation states, and then certain nation states have actually been much more active in terms of ensuring that it percolates right through society, both through government, encouraging it to do so through the corporate sector, but also through education as well. So how does one? I think they've done remarkably well when you compare the SDG impact to the Millennium Development Goals, which were the 15 years before that. Then there's been a step change, which is partly, of course, because media and communication has changed over that time as well. But I think the degree of understanding at a local level of the SDGs is much enhanced. It's far from perfect, but it is much enhanced. And of course, now the conversation's just beginning to start, as somebody was telling me the other day, starting within government here about, well, what comes after the SDGs, because they're due to finish, or due to be achieved, in inverted commas, by 2030. But I think they have been, and the fact that the United Nations has cohered around the SDGs in all of its agencies, in all of its work, has been a significant, more so than I remember experiencing it around the Millennium Development Goals, has been quite a strong force as well, given that there are so many UN agencies active in so many places. But could it be better, and could it be different, and etc.? Of course.
Sorry, I'm an introvert, so I'm like, but I'm really, first of all, I loved your project, and it's amazing to hear that you've been doing this for many years. And I'm really curious to know, because you are, let's say, planting the seed and seeing how these amazing students, they are living and going out and trying to find the jobs. And so my question is, and it really comes from curiosity, have you seen a change? Because we've been talking about organizations and purpose leading, all of that. But have you seen a change in the leadership, in the sense of how diverse it is and what's going on with representation? I'm originally from Mexico, and I didn't realize I was a person of color in my country until I moved to the UK.
Yeah.
And I was like, so that's why I always knew I wouldn't be, a director over there, because I'm a person of color. So I'm just curious to know if you've seen a change from this side to be more open to hire people of color.
Yeah, and you're saying from this side, as in the UK, or as in our country?
Yeah, in your country.
Yeah, so absolutely. So in our country, there's been such a shift over the last 20 years towards what they call Black economic empowerment. And in the beginning, it was very much because it was a tick-box exercise, because companies were expected to give money to what they call the empowerment codes to make sure that Black businesses were run by Black-owned entities and all of that. But it was very tick-box. And it was done in a way it was fronted. So there would be a Black face, but the people weren't really the right people or skilled enough to do that. And interestingly, I think that's come full circle, and that the people who are leading these businesses are Black and women, and they are amazing. And that goes back to how education. The reality is we still have a big problem in our education system, and there's still hundreds and thousands of people who aren't, and we're only touching a small piece. But the reality is that there's a big shift of people into a middle class that are educated, that are particularly in areas like Johannesburg, where it's a business district and city, who are doing really well and flying, and it's actually turned around in that it's harder for a white person to get a job because of that pressure. So there's a lot of white people that in South Africa turn to entrepreneurship and starting their own businesses or going overseas, which is also a great pity, because it's like a brain drain where people are going overseas because they don't see an opportunity in that way. But I think there's a balance that needs to happen. And also the voices of the youth. We have, like in other countries, we have big political problems, but the voices of the youth that are educated are now able to vote for the right people because they understand it. And yet there's still a huge amount of people who are following what their parents did or the party that their parents chose because of history. So it's, I mean, I don't have all the answers. I think we still have huge problems, and it's not, I don't see it coming right immediately. But in terms of that, in terms of Black people, and Black in our context is not just Black, there's Indian and colored and everything that we use, there's other terms. But it's incredible to see some beautiful, like, well-educated minds who are deserving in those positions and flying. Yeah.
In that sense, there really is a generational shift in South Africa, isn't there?
Absolutely.
In terms of a whole new generation, post-apartheid, post all of the changes, who've only known South Africa, which was post-apartheid,
exactly.
And have a set of expectations which are not only driven by their experience locally, as far as I can see, but also by looking at the rest of Africa and the rest of the world. So it's quite a global orientation.
Absolutely.
In terms of expectations of governance and government. And the role of the state, all of those kinds of things.
So it's actually it's a really like powerful space to be in, to see and to learn from. And I think there's some areas, I mean, there's a lot wrong, but where actually like they could teach the rest of the world of an example of how that shift has happened. So obviously I'm also speaking in a more positive way because I see our students in that way. And we do have amazing success stories of that. And we're only touching a small minority.
Thank you for that. It's all really, really interesting and great to hear the story of Tiva and the wonderful work you're doing. Jonathan, you talked about lives of consequence, and I'm interested in how you distinguish between the ideas of purpose and consequences of the things that you do. And we heard a lot around how to create coherent organisations rooted in purpose and alignment and with good leadership and good development. But plenty of organisations have those features that do bad things or achieve bad things, not necessarily actively intend to do them. I mean, Silicon Valley Bank has its purpose of advancing innovation for a better world. So how do we take that question that you asked around what as a graduate do you bring to what as a graduate, someone joining an organisation, should you be really looking for in terms of the consequence of the actions of that organisation, whether they appear to be purpose aligned or not?
It's funny because when we did our briefing, we talked about this. Last week we had a really good conversation about consequences. It's asking people to bring that conscience with them. So for the most part, I think completely agree with you that you might have an organisation that is very purposeful and has a very clear purpose. But is that not that impact and the consequences of what they're doing? And does anybody hold them to account for that? And so it's asking not just the people who are coming into the organisation to ask those sorts of questions. It's the questions that, as I said before, investors are asking. It's the questions that clients and customers of those organisations are asking, that's holding the mirror up and saying, actually, the consequences of what you're doing, and is this okay or not okay? So it's connecting the dots between the planet, the communities, the clients, and the organisations. So it's that connection piece which will hold up the mirror to consequences and to have the conversations. So sometimes actually the simplest of things is, are we creating in an organisation an environment and in a culture where people can have the conversation that is a tough conversation or the conversation that needs to be had, rather than just say what somebody else thinks what we think we need to hear. So are we able to have the tough conversations and ask the questions that probably were not easy to ask? And that's around holding the consequence to account in an organisation. If they're not doing that, that's hopefully where we come in and we go, yeah, that's why I'm going to go under.
I think there's a slight difference in meaning between a life of consequence and the consequences of our action. I mean, in my life,
I was just drawing a connection to
Yeah.
language.
because lives of consequence are lives of significance,
Yes.
and they, with the implicit view that there's a significance to others, not just to oneself. Because clearly in terms of purpose, I think it's one of the challenges within a purpose-driven, purpose-led, purpose-lived conversation is that there is a set of assumptions about what the purpose is about. And it's very clear in the case of CIBA what it is, because it's in your mission and all of those sorts of things. But just being purpose-led or purpose could be the most awful thing in the world. There's plenty of examples of people who've led very purposeful lives and or purposeful organizations that have done dreadful things. So perhaps we should have felt that out at the beginning of their there's a set of values that's embedded within any conversation about purpose here.
And I think it's actually it's a hard thing to answer. I think even when we look at the students that we recruit, all those that you're recruiting in graduates, sometimes what they've succeeded in or what they show on paper isn't a good measure. That they're going to have a conscience or going to be the best in academics or leadership or whatever it is. And it's actually just about, it's time, it's getting to know, it's having the conversations, it's seeing when they're vulnerable and how they deal with that. And with our students, it's also around those that are the most persevering, whether the academic results started out good or bad, whether they're going to make it. It's not a good measure. So I think it's something. It's almost intuitive. It's one part intuitive, but also a bit of the way in which they deliver, or you see, the way in which they, I'm trying to think of the right word, but so it's a time. It comes with time and comes with knowing and that openness.
And I think, if I may, just on that, I think there is a difference in the way that one can think about people and the way that one can think about organisations. I think it is a perfectly correct framing of people that they are inherently good and given the opportunity they will do good things. That's not a fundamentally correct framing for any organisation. Good, well-intentioned people working together can organisationally achieve bad things. So I just kind of wonder how do we start to separate out these ideas of how it manifests in a person and how it manifests in the actions of an organisation, where you get an abstraction and a separation.
Well, I think we're seeing more and more those that aren't coming out and getting put in, seeing the consequences of that, like, what's going on and where there's been fraud or where there's been, banks bought out and things. That's where it's coming out, and it's more and more it's happening. Yeah. So there was I
was just going to add to that. I work in that kind of field, and I think you really have to have a core set of values that act as a compass for the organisation that support the purpose. And that has to go into the ecosystem from a performance management perspective, how you set objectives, the what and the how as well. So if you're going to get it right for most organisations, and the ones I have worked in that have been very purpose-led, it's very much about the how. So no matter what you're doing for the company and what you've achieved, if you haven't done that in a way that lives the values, which should support the purpose, then you're out. And it needs to be that clear in an organisation that is purpose-lived and purpose-led. And I think a lot of the time that's subjective, because you have a line manager or a people leader who's then looking at the how, and it's their version of the how. It's well, actually that looks right. You're working with integrity based on my moral compass, but actually you may not be. So this is where the subjectivity comes in, and it's about having those clear guidelines on what does how mean. When we say a value of integrity, this means it shows up in this way. This is what it is not. And when it is not, then you have to have clear, transparent measures that show the action you're taking as a company, because often that doesn't happen. And the challenge most companies have is that you can't even display the transparency of the disciplinary action you're taking against people because of data privacy and goodness knows what else. So things are happening in companies where that kind of behaviour, or anti-purpose culture crushes, I normally call them, are pulled out and they're being dealt with. But you can't openly talk about that as a company, unfortunately. And I think that's one of the difficulties. And then I think on the larger scale, if you look externally, more sort of macro, when things are happening that companies are doing in the environment or economy, etc., then they have to rely very heavily on those values. And I always think about it, I look at culture, diversity, inclusion, all sorts of areas. But even from a diversity angle and inclusion angle, it's often a learning point, because often people are coming from the right place, but maybe something's happened, they've said something that's inappropriate. So you rely back on your values. Again, things like LGBTQ plus inclusion. You may have people who are very anti or homophobic, etc., have to deal with this in other companies, and they have strong value set, or they may be they may depend on their religion, and that's why they're saying it. But you have to go back and say the values in this company are we respect each other and we are inclusive. So if you cannot align to that, the only thing I can suggest is you need to find somewhere else to work, and that you leave the values that you personally believe in. If they are completely against the organisation, you leave them at the door, and that's often very difficult for people, and they'll soon find the door and go. But it's about being really thorough in the ecosystem within the organisation. You've got to tie it into so many different areas, and that's the challenge I think most organisations face.
Brilliantly said.
Well, I mean, a case in point is the Metropolitan Police. I mean, you can't dispute that they're a very purpose-led organisation, and yet culturally they've got big problems. So it's that confluence of culture, purpose, and values. You've got to make sure that they're equally well upheld.
Yes. Yeah. There's some boldness, there's some bravery to actually just make some decisions around. Actually, we are going to take action, and although that can't always be talked about, why just actually asking people to leave, because that. You can't continue to reward individuals in an organisation that aren't living those values, because it's just you're just creating a disease within the organisation. It's never going to go away. It won't ever live into its purpose.
Yeah, and there's such pride of people applying for jobs at the Metropolitan Police and feeling that they're serving their community. And then you get in and realise it's actually rotten at the core.
Well, the purpose has been subverted, hasn't it? Well, purpose is existing on a number of different levels. You know, the formal and the informal, because clearly self-protection has become a very big informal purpose, and they're serving our own rather than serving the community.
It's in the how.
Sorry, you probably haven't read this report. It's been all over the news in the last 24 hours.
But I also think that not everyone knows that they have the choice to not, or they don't, it's also the way in which, sometimes they're in a different situation. It's being able to discern.
Sometimes a bad culture trumps it all.
Yeah.
You can't fight it.
Completely. But I think the lady you said about putting in the pieces in the organisation that are going to support that. So actually it's the how. So those organisations that do that well, when somebody joins an organisation, they might be joining the Met Police for all the right reasons to serve the community. Are they having are they having a conversation 3 months, 6 months in to say, is this the organisation that you thought you were joining? What's working? What's not working? Are we listening to that? Are we acting on that? If that's not there, people may or may not act on that. But it's putting those things in place so that you can listen as well as guide.
May I just jump into the very polite lady who's raising her hand frequently? You have a question.
No, there's been some really, really interesting questions, and I wanted to actually ask mine after your question about I am a graduate, so back to recruitment and the value for new recruits to apply for a company, and also what value do recruiters see in who they're recruiting. So my question is, where do we see the value in education, value in experience, or value and attitude. I'm very, very grateful that I went to university here in the UK. I did a placement year, like you were saying, many of your students did. And I don't think I would have gotten this job without my placement year. And I don't think, loved going to university, had a great time, learned so much. But the experience I got in that 1 year, or not even, in my placement year, and I was speaking to Alison and Ruby before the panel, it wasn't even in finance. It was completely different, but it was how I worked with people and the strategy behind it, and networking and working in a team and projects and things like this that I could talk about in my interview. And I think we have a few individuals from the ICBC Standard Bank HR team here. So please correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like I don't think I would have gotten this scheme if I didn't have that experience, and maybe even attitude and the education. So where's the value in those three?
Yeah, so I think that's absolutely true and important. That's what, to get as much experience. And we often advise, and people in all areas, not necessarily coming out of our work, that even volunteering, like if you can't get a job, just to volunteer and spend time in an organization is the best way in, because they get to know you and you give and you get to understand what it is like in the world of work. So absolutely, I think that it's critical, and those skills are so important, and not enough universities, I think more and more they do build in that workplace experience, or even just access to networks and opportunities. It's huge. Yeah, maybe you want to.
It's such a big topic.
Yeah.
On so many levels, because there's so many people do not enter the kind of employment market, if you like, looking for a placement on an equal basis.
Mm.
And it's the role of institutions like ours to try and make sure that people do. But the reality is they don't. Some enter with family contacts, some enter with, better networking capacity, all sorts of things. But we encourage the placement experience, and we're trying to, personally, in our institution, and I work a lot with placements, we're trying to think of all the ways we can of building what we call in the trade kind of social capital, educational capital, the capacity to actually function in those environments sufficiently to get your foot in the door. Because we know all the benefits, we've tracked all the benefits, not only in terms of future employment, but also in terms of actually the quality of the degree, because you normally come back and finish your degree. The people who've done work placements come back and get, on average, a higher category of degree than those who haven't. So there are so many benefits to it. But a lot of work can and is being done, but can still be done in terms of getting employers with the capacity to take those kind of placement students on, in particularly the bigger employers, to recognize the value of doing that. Some do and some don't.
It's funny because as graduates we're asked, or maybe new joiners in general, do you want to see, new set of eyes and your new ideas? And like, how can I just get that from, I'm grateful for my education, but how can I get that from just going to school or having a great degree, but I don't have those new set of eyes in the business context, or in this context, financial industry. There's no way, I don't think, without that placement year.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it can be done, and many people do, and that's what graduate schemes are for in this country as well. I don't know whether they exist in the same way.
Yeah.
The graduate schemes provide entry points to good graduates who may have not have had work experience in the past. So it is possible, but it's certainly aided by that placement year. But it's just a phenomenal opportunity to grow up as well, and that's what all the students who come back. So they come back completely different people.
Some don't want to come back.
Some don't want to come back. No, that's true. We have to kicking and screaming. We have to drag them back.
That's always a nice compliment. As one of our placements, you go, I really don't want to go back in September. It's nice.
We always think, what's so bad about going back to university?
One of the things that I think there are other things that the qualities of the graduate programs, or even when you're an intern. So some of the best practices we've seen are reverse mentoring. So you take that group of people and they spend time with more senior leaders in the organisation, and they mentor them on what they're seeing and hearing in the organisation and what they're thinking and what their ideas are, and they can be phenomenally successful. But you need you need those organisations to open their doors and invite people in, and it's hard work. We've been involved in that, in bringing other organisations in to meet a group of potential interns, and it's really hard.
So one thing that we do, I think we must think of it, is we also, our students get mentors, and they're in different walks of life, and then they change as you move up. And that person, whether they're giving advice in life or in career, is so instrumental in guiding you through that and opening those doors. And another thing is also that we've seen some companies do, and institutions, is you don't just do an internship, but you have to actually solve a problem for that company and present it, and also with our entrepreneurs. So if you're actually showing the organization that you have thought about something or solved a problem that can save them money, or not even that, just that they haven't thought about before, that's been a big shift in terms of like getting into employment.
Yes, I think the quality of the questions shows that our panelists did an amazing job. They've given us a lot of food for thought, hopefully things that we'll reflect on afterwards. So maybe you'll join me in just a short round of applause for our guests.
Can we from the stage do a short round of applause for our wonderful audience as well?
Exactly.
Lovely, thank you all. And my catering team will really be very disappointed if there's anything left over. So please help us finish.
Hot course.
Hot course, exactly. There you go.
That's the purpose from now on. Yeah. Thank you, Nikki.
Thank you.